Hey friends, Arthur here. Welcome back to the channel, where we follow the money. For nearly half a century, the global economy has run on a simple, powerful deal. The world sells its oil, and it gets paid in U.S. dollars. This isn't just a quirky habit, it's the bedrock of the petrodollar system. An arrangement that has helped keep the American dollar the undisputed king of world currencies. But what if that deal is breaking down? On March 26, 2018, China fired a shot across the dollar's bow by launching its own oil futures contract priced in its own currency, the Yuan. They call it the Petroyuan. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was the beginning of a long-term strategy to challenge America's financial dominance and offer an alternative to countries tired of playing by Washington's rules. So, is this the financial showdown of the century? A real-life Game of Thrones, but with currencies instead of dragons. How could a switch in how we pay for black gold actually shake up the world order and, believe it or not, maybe even the price you pay at the pump? In this video, we're going to dive deep into China's ambitious plan. We lines break down exactly what the Petroyuan is, unpack the secret deal from the 1970s that crowned the dollar in the first place, and explore whether this challenger has what it takes to actually dethrone the king. Stick around, because the tectonic plates of the global economy are shifting, and you're going to want to understand what happens when they do. Let's get into it. Part 1. The dollar's oil monopoly. So, how did the U.S. dollar pull off the greatest magic trick in financial history? It wasn't by being stronger or more stable, but by attaching itself to something the entire world couldn't live without: black gold. To understand this, we need to rewind to the early 1970s. The U.S. was in a tough spot. The Vietnam War was draining the treasury, and inflation was soaring. For decades, the dollar's value had been anchored to gold under a system called Bretton Woods. Other countries could, in theory, exchange their dollars for a fixed amount of U.S. gold. But as America printed more and more money to pay its bills, other nations got nervous. They started asking for their gold back, and the U.S. gold reserves plummeted. So, on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon did something unthinkable. He went on live television and announced the U.S. was severing the dollar's link to gold. This event, known as the Nixon shock, effectively ended the Bretton Woods system. Suddenly, the dollar was a free-floating currency, backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. For the first time, its status as the world's reserve currency was in serious jeopardy. America needed a new anchor, and fast. Then, in 1973, another crisis hit: the OPEC oil embargo. Arab oil-producing nations, furious at U.S. support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War, cut off oil exports. Gas prices quadrupled, panic ensued, and the U.S. economy was shaken to its core. But in this crisis, Washington saw an opportunity. They sent Treasury Secretary William Simon on a secret mission to Saudi Arabia, the undisputed king of OPEC. The proposal he carried was a game changer. It was a simple, yet brilliant deal. The U.S. would offer Saudi Arabia advanced military hardware, training, and a promise of political protection for the kingdom. In return, Saudi Arabia had to do two things. First, they had to agree to price all of their oil sales to every country in the world exclusively in U.S. dollars. No pounds, no yen, no marks. Only dollars. Second, they would take their massive profits from these oil sales, billions of so-called petrodollars, and invest them back into U.S. government debt, like treasury bonds. Saudi Arabia agreed. In June 1974, the deal was formalized, and soon after, the rest of OPEC followed their lead. The petrodollar system was born. Now, here's the aha moment. This wasn't just about oil sales. It was about creating permanent, artificial demand for the U.S. dollar. Think about it. If you were Japan or Germany in the 1980s and you needed to buy oil to power your factories, you couldn't pay in your own currency. You first had to go out and buy U.S. dollars. This forced every oil importing nation on earth to keep huge stockpiles of U.S. dollars in their central banks, just to function. The dollar was no longer backed by gold, it was backed by the world's unquenchable thirst for oil. And that second part of the deal, that was the master stroke. By having the oil producers funnel their profits back into U.S. bonds, it meant the U.S. could run massive deficits, and other countries would essentially finance that debt for them. It gave America what's been called an exorbitant privilege, the ability to buy whatever it wanted from the world simply by printing more of its own money, knowing there would always be a demand for it. This petrodollar recycling system cemented the dollar's position as the undisputed king of global finance, giving the U.S. immense economic and geopolitical power. For 50 years, this financial fortress seemed untouchable, a pillar of the American-led world order. But, as we're about to see, every empire faces a challenger. And in the 21st century, a new economic power has emerged with a plan to build its own system, brick by brick. Part 2. Enter the Petroyuan. For decades, every country buying oil had to do it on America's terms, using America's currency. But China, now the world's biggest oil importer, got tired of paying its biggest rival for the privilege of keeping its own lights on. This wasn't just about money, it was about power. Paying in dollars meant being vulnerable to U.S. sanctions and financial pressure. So, Beijing decided to build its own table to play at. On March 26, 2018, they made their move, launching Yuan-denominated crude oil futures contracts on the Shanghai International Energy Exchange, or INE. In simple terms, they created a new marketplace where anyone, from anywhere in the world, could buy and sell oil using Chinese money for the first time. This was a direct, calculated shot at the heart of the petrodollar system. Think of it like this. For 50 years, the only arcade machine that sold oil took one kind of token, the U.S. dollar. Suddenly, China wheeled in a brand new machine right next to it that accepts the yuan. And this wasn't just for show. On the very first day of trading, over 42,000 contracts changed hands. With a turnover of more than 18 billion yuan. International giants like Glencore participated right from the start. The message was clear. This was a serious alternative. The primary customers for this new system, countries that had a strained relationship with Washington. Nations like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, all major oil producers choked by U.S. sanctions, suddenly had an escape hatch. They could now sell their oil to China, their biggest customer, and get paid in yuan, completely bypassing the U.S. banking system and the threat of financial punishment. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, for example, its reliance on yuan-based trade exploded. But China knew that just offering a new currency wasn't enough. The world trusted the dollar. To build that same confidence in the yuan, Beijing added a brilliant twist. A throwback to an older, more stable era. They made the Petroyuan convertible into physical gold. Any country that earned yuan from selling oil could exchange it for actual gold bars on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. This was a master stroke. It was a direct echo of the Bretton Woods system the U.S. itself had abandoned. While the dollar was backed by full faith and credit, China was signaling that its currency, at least for oil trading, was backed by the oldest and most trusted asset in human history. This gold backing was a powerful incentive, designed to reassure oil producers that the yuan was a safe and reliable store of value. It was a clever way to build trust in a system dominated by the dollar for half a century. By creating a non-dollar alternative, providing a lifeline to sanctioned nations, and backing it all with the promise of gold. China didn't just build a rival system. It built a potential sanctuary for countries looking for a way out of America's financial orbit. The stage was set. The pieces were on the board. But building a new financial system is one thing. Getting the rest of the world, especially America's key allies, to actually use it, well, that's a whole different game. Part 3. Why China is doing this. So, we've established that China has built a brand new, gold-backed arcade machine to sell its oil. But let's be honest, wheeling in a new machine is one thing. The real question is, why bother? Why pick a fight with a system that has dominated the globe for half a century? The answer lies in one of the fundamental rules of power. Never let your biggest rival control your lifeline. And for China, the world's factory and its largest oil importer, that lifeline is energy. But the currency it has to use to buy that energy, the U.S. dollar, is controlled by its chief geopolitical and economic competitor. It's like having to pay your rent to a landlord who could evict you at any moment, for any reason. Beijing looked at this situation and saw not just an inconvenience, but a profound strategic vulnerability. This vulnerability has 3 critical layers. The first is pure economic dependency. For decades, China has been one of the biggest buyers of U.S. government debt, holding vast reserves of treasury bonds. At its peak in 2013, it held over $1.3 trillion worth. Now, this was partly a strategy to keep its own currency's value down to make its exports cheap. But it also created a bizarre codependency. China was essentially loaning massive sums of money to the U.S., which then used that money to buy Chinese goods. It worked, but it also meant a huge chunk of China's national wealth was tied up in the currency of its rival. This strategy of reducing its holdings is a clear move to insulate itself from U.S. economic policy. The second, and far more dangerous, vulnerability is the weaponization of the dollar. The United States doesn't just benefit from the dollar's dominance. It actively uses it as a tool of foreign policy. Because most international trade is priced in dollars and cleared through U.S. banks, Washington has a virtual chokehold on the global financial system. If a country, company, or even an individual falls out of favor with the U.S., Washington can simply cut off their access to the dollar system. This isn't a slap on the wrist, it's a financial death sentence. It's the power to freeze assets and block transactions, effectively kicking a nation out of the global economy. China has watched with keen interest as the U.S. has used this financial hammer against countries like Iran and Russia. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. and its allies sanctioned Russia's central bank and cut it off from key financial networks. The result? Russia's trade with China exploded, and by early 2024, over 90% of their bilateral trade was settled in yuan or rubles, completely bypassing the dollar. For Beijing, the lesson was crystal clear. What happened to Moscow could easily happen to them, especially in a conflict over an issue like Taiwan. The desire to insulate China from this type of economic assault is the primary driver behind the push for the Petroyuan. The third and final reason is ambition. This isn't just a defensive move, it's about projecting power. For China to truly be a global superpower, its economic might needs to be reflected in its currency's influence. Promoting the yuan as an international currency is a long-term strategic goal. A world that uses the yuan for trade is a world that is more invested in China's success and more aligned with its financial systems. The Petroyuan is the perfect Trojan horse for this strategy. Oil is the world's most traded commodity. By carving out a niche for the yuan in the energy markets, China gets other countries accustomed to holding and using its currency. This is all part of a broader strategy known as de-dollarization. The goal isn't necessarily to kill the dollar overnight, but to slowly and methodically build an alternative system. Brick by brick, reducing the world's dependence on the American financial system. So, China's motivations are a potent mix of fear, self-interest, and ambition. Fear of U.S. sanctions, the self-interest of reducing economic dependency, and the ambition to make the yuan a global player. They're not just building a new oil market, they're laying the foundation for a new financial world order. But there's one giant obstacle in their path: trust. Part 4. The yuan's big hurdles. So, China has built this shiny new system, backed it with gold, and is ready for business. But there's a catch. And it's a big one. It's like putting your life savings in a bank that looks impressive. But the manager has the only key and decides if and when you can make a withdrawal. That, in a nutshell, is the single biggest hurdle for the Petroyuan: China's strict capital controls. The yuan is not freely convertible. This means money can't just flow in and out of China based on the market. The government in Beijing holds the remote control, and they are not afraid to use it. Think of it this way. The U.S. dollar financial system is like a massive, public, 24/7 superhighway. Anyone can get on, anyone can get off, at any time, with trillions of dollars moving at lightning speed. It's liquid, it's reliable, and it's open. The yuan, by contrast, is more like a private, gated road. To move your money, you need permission. An individual Chinese citizen, for example, is generally only allowed to exchange up to 50,000 per year. For a multinational energy giant or a sovereign wealth fund, that kind of uncertainty is a deal breaker. They need to know that the billions they earn in yuan can be freely converted and invested anywhere in the world, not just kept inside China's financial system at the government's discretion. This leads to the second massive hurdle, the sheer, overwhelming dominance of the dollar. The U.S. dollar is one side of nearly 90% of all global foreign exchange transactions. It's not just a currency, it's the financial system's operating system. There's an ocean of liquidity, built on decades of trust in U.S. markets and institutions. The Petroyuan, by comparison, is a tiny pond. To dethrone the dollar, you don't just need a better alternative. You need to convince the entire world to abandon a system that, for all its flaws, works and is deeply entrenched. And this reveals the fundamental paradox at the heart of China's ambition. To create a true global reserve currency, Beijing would have to give up control. It would need to open its capital account, let the yuan's value be set by the market, and submit to international financial norms. But for the Chinese Communist Party, maintaining tight control over the economy is non-negotiable. So they want the power of a global currency, but without giving up the domestic control that defines their political system. They want to be the world's bank, but keep the vault door locked from the inside. Part 5. So, is the dollar doomed? So, with China facing this fundamental paradox, is the dollar's decades-long reign finally over? Well, the short, simple answer is no. An overnight collapse is pure fantasy. The dollar is too deeply embedded in the global system. It's like trying to replace the entire internet in a weekend. It's just not going to happen. But here's the real story, the one that matters. The Petroyuan, in a knockout punch. It's part of a much longer, slower game, a death by 1,000 cut strategy. The goal, isn't to replace the dollar, but to create a world where it's no longer the only option. This is the heart of the dollarization. And the evidence is piling up. Just look at the world as central banks. At the turn of the century, over 70% of their foreign reserves were held in U.S. dollars. Today, that number has fallen to well below 60%. It's a slow, deliberate walk away from dependency. And this isn't just a China story. It's a global trend. The BRICS nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, and their partners are actively building their own financial networks to settle trade directly, completely bypassing the dollar. We're seeing countries sign bilateral deals to trade in their own currencies everywhere. China and Brazil are settling billions in trade using yuan and reais. India and the UAE are doing oil deals in rupees. Each of these agreements is one less transaction propping up the dollar's dominance. And that reveals the Petroyuan's true purpose. It isn't a magic bullet designed to kill the dollar. It's a strategic crowbar designed to pry open the world's most important market energy and create a space for a viable alternative to exist. So, is the dollar doomed? No, but its days of absolute, unchallenged power are numbered. We're not witnessing the coronation of a new king in the yuan. We're witnessing the slow, steady rise of a more multipolar currency world, one where the dollar is still the most powerful player on the board, but no longer the only one in the game. The king isn't dead, but the court is definitely getting more crowded. If you enjoyed this video and want to keep following the money to see who gets a seat at the table, Do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It's free, and unlike the Yuan, it's fully convertible. Arthur, out.